Hey folks, welcome back to the lore of Zelda's famous locations, my series where we take a deep dive into the lore, details, secrets and mysteries within each Zelda game's most famous and iconic locations. In this episode, we will be taking a look at the fan favourite Nintendo 64 classic, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. So far in this series, we've looked at Twilight Princess, The Wind Waker, Majora's Mask, and Skyward Sword. In terms of the 3D Zelda games, we've only got Ocarina of Time and then Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule to cover. If you want to check out the other episodes, which are all around 25 to 30 minutes long, great for a wee binge watch or to have on whilst cleaning or studying, then check out the playlist linked down in the description. These videos take a good bit of effort to produce, so if you'd be able to drop a wee like down below, that'd help out massively. Subscribe if you're not already for more fabulous Zelda content coming your way. And without further ado, be sure to go and grab yourself a delicious snack and drink, folks. Send them in on social media for a chance to be featured right here. And let's explore the lore of Ocarina of Time's famous locations. Let's start this lore dive in the central heart of the kingdom. This is where we find Hyrule Castle, the second most northern location in the game, second to Death Mountain. This is the home of Hyrule's royalty. It's a white brick castle with blue tile-top peaks, a classic medieval fantasy style. It's heavily guarded as you'd expect. There are many guards in the castle grounds leading up to the main entrance, as well as a fence, a moat, and a drawbridge. It's a solid home for the royals. Speaking of which, this is where we first meet Princess Zelda after Link sneaks through the gardens to her wee private courtyard. We know that the King of Hyrule, and whilst not mentioned, we can assume that the Queen also lives here. It's never really said if there is currently a Queen or not during the events of Ocarina of Time. The castle also overlooks the famous Castle Town, the hub of Hyrule and home to many of its people. The town is also surrounded by a moat and large walls with a drawbridge connecting to Hyrule Field, so the castle itself is technically guarded by a double moat, as well as the large Castle Town walls. As you can imagine, a lot of significant events would have taken place here. One in particular takes place during our adventure. When Link ventures to the castle to seek out Princess Zelda, when he does find her in the castle courtyard, they take a peek inside the throne room where we see Ganondorf, the King of Evil, pledging allegiance to the King of Hyrule, though this allegiance and sign of peace would soon be revealed to be nothing but a lie. Prior to reaching her, we had seen Ganondorf already, within Link's nightmare during the opening of the game. The hero could see that this man was evil and plotting for Hyrule's downfall, though as two kids they couldn't do anything. Zelda herself mentions that she just knows something isn't right with this man, and in a chilling fashion, Ganondorf swiftly turns his head towards the pair. This false allegiance would turn out to be one of the biggest mistakes in the kingdom's history, as a little later on, once Link has completed the first 3 dungeons and collected the 3 spiritual stones, he gains access to the Master Sword Chamber in the Temple of Time, and when he draws the blade, a gateway to the Sacred Realm is opened, and Link is left helpless as he becomes sealed within for 7 years. But more importantly, as he draws the blade, Ganondorf snuck in. The King of Evil managed to find his way into the Sacred Realm, where he can find the Triforce, the holy relic of the Zelda universe. The reason he swore allegiance to the king was to be able to get this close, and his plan worked out brilliantly. This then kicks off the rest of the game, but it's kinda crazy that all of this started when Ganondorf swore his allegiance to the king at Hyrule Castle. Though there is still more highly significant lore that involves this castle. Prior to the events of the game, the Hyrulean Civil War took place. This war was for control of the kingdom, and ultimately ended in the unification of Hyrule under one banner. This includes Ganondorf swearing his allegiance, placing the Gerudo Desert under the control of Hyrule, though Ganondorf only did this to gain the king's trust and move freely across Hyrule. It's not super clear on how this war first broke out, or any significant battles, but with Hyrule Castle being the home of Hylian royalty, you can imagine that their plans and operation was primarily based from the castle, with the king and his high-ranked knights forming strategies and plans, opening negotiation with others in the war. Lots would have gone on here during this war. On top of that, we also know that the Sheikah tribe work as servants to the royal family of Hyrule, and prior to the events of the game, we know that Kakariko Village was exclusively a Sheikah settlement, which was also home to some seriously dark stuff that the royal family were behind as well. So it's likely that a lot of work between the two also happened here at the castle, particularly in relation to the war. That's the main lore to know about the castle. However, there are some smaller details that are quite cool. For example, when Link is caught trespassing on the grounds on his way to find Princess Zelda, if he's caught outside the inner castle, he'll be escorted back to the main entrance by Castletown. But if he is caught within the castle, he is only escorted out to the secret entrance he snuck in from, so he's still trespassing. Just a funny little detail. Whilst in the courtyard, if you take a wee peek in the windows, you'll be able to see framed pictures of Mario characters on the walls. A fun little nod to another extremely successful and popular Nintendo 64 game. Another interesting mystery about the castle is this statue found on the way to the courtyard. We don't really know who this is depicting. Potentially a past hero? Potentially the king. I'm not too sure. I did a video about it a little while ago if you'd like to check it out, but to this day, I'm still not 100% sure. This is the landmark of Hyrule, and contains some very significant lore. The castle undergoes a massive change halfway through the story, but we'll leave that lore dive for a little later on in the video. In the northeast of Hyrule, we can find the previously mentioned Kakariko Village. Founded by the Sheikah, sitting beneath Death Mountain, and home to some seriously lore-heavy locations. In the modern day, Kakariko is a home for all, no longer exclusive to just the Sheikah, and this is thanks to Impa, Kakariko born and raised, and the current leader figure of the Sheikah tribe. She opened the doors to the poor commoners of Hyrule, growing the village and establishing it as a welcome home for all. It's a growing work in progress and is visited often throughout the game for a number of reasons. The first is when Link makes his way to Death Mountain. The only accessible path is found in Kakariko Village, guarded by a royal knight and only ever opened if one has the permission of the king, but this is just the beginning of what the village contains. Kakariko is home to some seriously deep lore. For example, at the back of the Kakariko graveyard we can find a large tombstone. If moved and entered, this leads us to the royal family tomb, the place of rest for those of the royal family. It's a chilling tomb with toxic water, monster infestation, and the resting place of royals of the past. It also contains the Sun Song at the end, a famous work of the composer brothers. There's also the bottom of the well, an ordinary looking well situated in the village, but deep down inside is a mini dungeon, and the location where Link can find the powerful Sheikah artifact, the Lens of Truth. A lens that when looked through can reveal what is not possible to see by the naked eye, such as false walls, hidden treasure, and even enemies. It's not mandatory to venture down the well, but without the Lens of Truth, it makes a few sections of the game very difficult. When the well is first discovered as Child Link, it's filled with water and is inaccessible. However, as an adult, it's drained, but the bottom is blocked in. In order to enter, Link must return to the past as a child, play the Song of Storms to the phonogram man inside the windmill hut, causing the mill to supercharge and drain the water. The insides of the well are creepy. It's a damp dungeon filled with illusionary walls and tricky puzzles, as well as the Lens of Truth. Professor Shikashai says this about the well. A long time ago, there was a man in this very village who had an eye they said could see the truth. Now, usually, you have to train your mind's eye most strenuously to actually see the truth. But this fella, no. They said he had a different way of doing things. His house stood where the well is now. Quite the interesting bit of history, considering this is directly referencing the item we find down in the well. Perhaps that man the professor speaks of was the creator of the lens. That previously mentioned windmill hut is also a massive piece of Zelda lore in itself, arguably the most interesting and well-known paradox, as when Link first meets the phonogram man inside playing a melody to the rotation of the mill, he seems happy. However, when Link ventures into the future, the man is angry, directly at a young child who taught him a song on his ocarina, a song that caused the windmill to turn without stop. This young boy is referring to Link, but how could he have taught the man if we never did that? Well, here's the paradox. In the future, Link learns the song, and then goes back into the past to teach it to the man, completing the paradox. Confusing, right? There's also the infamous House of Skulltula. Inside, it's a bare home covered by cobwebs and old ruined furniture. We can find symbols of the Sheikah inside, as well as portraits of spiders. According to Professor Shikashi, an extremely rich family once lived here, but were cursed due to greed. When Link enters, he can find the cursed rich man and his 5 sons, who appear as Skulltulas. The only way to lift this curse is for Link to collect all of the golden Skulltulas found across Hyrule. Link will be rewarded with rupees for helping them, as well as return the home to a normal state. However, the utmost lore-heavy part of Kakariko Village is found at the top end of the graveyard. This is where Link gains access to the game's 7th dungeon, the Shadow Temple. The reason we venture in here to begin with is chilling in itself. After Ganondorf rises to power in Hyrule, a great evil being that was imprisoned at the bottom of the well manages to escape, wreaking havoc in Kakariko, setting the village ablaze and knocking both Impa and Link down. The evil retreats to the head of the graveyard, which is where we can find the entrance to the Shadow Temple. The location has themes of fear and death, blood-stained walls, and a chilling atmosphere that sets in at the speed of light. Walking around the Shadow Temple is like a nightmare. There are terrifying devices all over. Blades, traps, and horrible devices, but what's even worse is that this isn't your typical evil's doing. This is the property of the royal family. Hyrule's monarch had the Sheikah take their enemies here to interrogate, torture, and sometimes worse. This is such a dark part of Hyrule's history that it has become taboo to even talk about, and the Hyrulean royal family are essentially trying to bury this piece of their history. The bloodshed found in here, along with the awful torture devices, are all on the royals' hands. This was used during wars and conflicts. I can't even begin to imagine the sounds of Hyrule's enemies that were taken here. The screams, the bloodshed, and, most chilling of all, the silence that comes after. It's even said that this place was built with bones, and that the traps and devices in here would help add to that collection. It's never really said who built the temple, only that the royals and Sheikah used it. Regardless, it's a horrible part of Hyrule's history, and is where Link seeks out the game's 7th boss, Bongo Bongo, a great evil that we don't know the origins of. Thankfully on the outside, the Blue Juggler and other residents of Kakariko managed to stop the fires that the beast created, and ultimately, Kakariko Village was saved. In the heart of Hyrule Field, we can find Lon Lon Ranch, the home of Hyrule's famous Lon Lon milk, as well as where we first meet our horse, Epona. This is the home of Talon and his daughter Malon, as well as Ingo, made up of one house, one barn, and a farm. They produce that famous milk drank across the entire kingdom, but it's also home to cuckoos and horses, which is quite an important part of this story, as this is where Link first meets Epona as a child. Young Malon teaches Link Epona's song, which would come in handy later on in the adventure as this song summons the horse. It's quite a peaceful life here, but when Ganondorf's reign began, things took a turn. Following the King of Evil's takeover, Talon was kicked out. The father of Malon was forced to be separated from his child as she remained at the ranch working away under the nasty leadership of Ingo, who had become corrupt to Ganondorf. He even promises the King of Evil a mighty fine horse. However, when Link shows up, he finds himself in a betting race with Ingo, eventually putting Epona on the line, and when Link wins this bet, Ingo changes his mind, locking the gates and refusing to give Epona up to Link. And in the most badass fashion, we can choose to escape with Epona by either jumping the ranch gate or jumping the outer fence into Hyrule Field. And sometime following this, Malon informs Link that Ingo gave up control and that Malon will soon return. This is the first place we meet Epona, and she'd go on to become a reoccurring character as Link's mighty steed in future installments to the series. In the east of Hyrule, deep within the Lost Woods, we can find a magical settlement known as Kokiri Forest, the home of the Kokiri tribe, guardian of the forest, and the starting place for this adventure. This is where Ocarina of Time begins, with Link waking up in his wee treehouse home. It's a whimsical place to live, but is only accessible to the Kokiri due to the surrounding protection of the Lost Woods. Though Link is not Kokiri, rather a Hylian. So just how and why does he start out here? Prior to the events of Ocarina of Time during the war, a Hylian mother fleeing the war found herself escaping into the Lost Woods with her baby. In a desperate attempt to provide a safe life for her child, she hands the baby over to the guardian of the forest, the Great Deku Tree, and he takes the child into his protection. Years later, we start our adventure as that baby, but now growing into a child. This is why Link doesn't have a fairy like the rest of the Kokiri children, not until his great quest is called upon by the Great Deku Tree, when he's assigned Navi. The forest is known as the source of life, maintaining order and keeping others outside of the Forbidden Forest. The Kokiri Forest is surrounded by the Lost Woods, which it's said that no Kokiri can enter in an attempt to leave, or they will die. This is why Link is able to leave. He isn't Kokiri. The forest is a magical place, and where we as the player get to grips with the controls, the Great Deku Tree even being the first dungeon in the game. It's a protected and important place, but once Ganondorf takes the crown, things change. When Link returns as an adult, he'll find the forest to be overrun. Enemies are inside the settlement, and the Kokiri children are trapped inside hiding in fear. It's quite different to how we first saw it. The Great Deku Tree is still a bit of a dead hollow remain. However, after venturing to the Forest Temple and completing the dungeon, a new Deku Tree sprouts in front of the former, and it's through talking to this wee sprout that Link learns of his history, the story of his mother fleeing war, and leaving him in the trust of the forest. The Lost Woods that surround the village is a famous location in itself. A strange magic flows through these woods. It's a maze, but with an unexplainable pattern. Wrong turns will take you back to where you began. Pathways look identical and will play tricks on you. Patterns must be followed to reach your destination. It's purposefully near impossible to traverse to protect the locations within. It's said that those who become lost turn into Stalfos, and that the Skull Kids we see in the Lost Woods were once Kokiri children who left the village. In the north of Hyrule, we can find the towering mountain that looks over the kingdom, Death Mountain. Home to the rock-eating Gorons, forgers of blades, and containing some fascinating locations such as Dodongo's Cavern and the Fire Temple. In order to even set foot on the mountain trail, Link must first acquire the king's permission, which you'll gain on a written note. The entrance is guarded in Kakariko Village, but once through, a young Link will quickly realise why this route is off limits. It's a grueling tough journey to the top. Rockfall is quite frequent. Small tedious enemies are found all the way up, but if the young hero makes his way up, he'll find Goron City, the home of the rock-eating Gorons, a brotherly tribe that have a really cool culture within their home. They're very tribal and close-knit, friendly and inviting people. The nature of this mountain is unique, as the clouds that sit above Death Mountain can tell us from afar the state of the mountain, whether things are well or if there is a problem. As a child, Link ventures into Dodongo's Cavern in search of the Goron Ruby in order to gain access to the Master Sword. This is a cavern a little further down the mountain that is home to many Dodongos, large lizard creatures native to the mountain, with their big daddy king, King Dodongo, serving as the dungeon boss. As an adult, Link returns and goes even further in the mountain, entering the Fire Temple, which is only accessible with the fire-resistant red tunic, and by travelling through the mountain crater. Within this dungeon, Link learns that some Gorons are being kept as prisoners in the temple, one of the many horrible acts of Ganondorf as Hyrule's king. Even worse, the Gorons trapped in here were in line to be fed to the dungeon boss, Volvagia, the spirit of the mountain, an ancient dragon that was once slayed, but Ganondorf decided to resurrect. It's Link's job now with the mighty Megaton Hammer to put the dragon down once again. This game gives us our first look at the Gorons and their home, and is a brilliant look at their culture and history all within the mountain. We even get hands-on experience with some of the Gorons' famous forging skills, as we get to use the Begoron sword created by Begoron himself. In the northeast of Hyrule, we can find a unique home to a unique race of people. This is where we'll find Zora's domain. Home of the Zora people and their royalty, King Zora and his daughter Princess Ruto. It's a system of beautiful caverns filled with water and waterfalls. It connects to the Zora River as well as a secret tunnel that leads to Lake Hylia. This is the central hub of Hyrule's water flow, if you like. In order for Link to first enter, he needs to play Zelda's lullaby at the top of the Zora River in order to open a pathway inside. His reason for being here is in his quest to find the Zora Sapphire, one of the 3 spiritual stones. It's found inside Lord Jabu Jabu, a sacred deity that resides above Zora's domain within the Zora's Fountain. In past games, the Zora were hostile enemies that would attack Link. However, in Ocarina of Time they were for the first time depicted as friendly and welcoming. When Link obtains the Zora Sapphire after exploring and beating the game's 3rd dungeon, which is actually the insides of Lord Jabu Jabu, he is given the relic by Princess Ruto. Though, without knowing how Zora customs work, the giving of this relic actually acts as an engagement. In this moment, Princess Ruto and Link become engaged, or promised to be, and later on in the story, as adult Link, this is brought back up, much to Link's surprise. Speaking of as an adult, if Link returns to the scenic domain, he'll find that Ganondorf's reign over Hyrule has also affected this location. It becomes frozen over, some parts being frozen in red ice, only meltable with a blue flame. This is caused due to Morpha, the boss of the water temple found below Lake Hylia, though we don't see the domain restored until the end credits of the game. There isn't a lot of lore known about the history of the domain, but we can assume that considering the Zora have their own monarchy system, that during the likes of the Hyrulean Civil War that took place before the events of Ocarina of Time, that significant discussions took place here, with the king, other royals, and possibly even others in the war to settle agreements and such. Regardless of it having less lore in the times of Ocarina of Time, it's still quite the beautiful location to look at. Connecting to that last location, the famous Lake Hylia is also a site of significance. Home to one of the game's dungeons, a laboratory, a fishing pond, and even an unexplained mystery that to this day we do not know the answer to. Found in the south of Hyrule, this lake is a stunning escape from the adventure, though it does tie into the adventure with the water temple found at the bottom of the lake. This was once a place that the Zora people used to worship the water spirits, though now has been overtaken by Ganondorf's evil. The lake has multiple islands, one of which contains a warp point for Link, but most interesting is that with the scratched tree. Here lies a tree with a large scratch on it, but just what creature left such a mark? We don't find many enemies here at the lake, and those that we do don't possess such claws to leave this. Interestingly, this claw mark only appears in the Nintendo 64 version of the game. It was removed in the 3DS remake. This could indicate that it held no significance, but taking that for an answer is just lame. A much cooler way to look at this is to suggest that perhaps a dragon that passed these lands left its mark, or a foul creature from the depths of the lake from long ago left its mark, but ultimately there is no answer to this mystery. The fishing hole over beside the lake is one of the coolest little additions to the game in my opinion. I'm a very big fan of the fishing in Twilight Princess, and believe that Ocarina of Time did a pretty good job with fishing as well. An interesting piece of lore about the man who runs this pond is that his legacy goes on around 100 years after the events of this game in Twilight Princess. When we visit Henna's fishing hole in that game, we can see a photo of the fishing man from Ocarina of Time, and it's even hinted at him and Henna being related. There is also the laboratory, of course, where we can meet the lake scientist, a researcher who dedicates his time to marine biology. Interestingly, if you swim to the bottom of his indoor pool, you'll find a shark behind some bars. A truly terrifying discovery when first playing Ocarina of Time. Now for one of my favourite famous locations, the Gerudo Valley, an overall desert region. Found in the west of Hyrule, we can find a scorching hot region with various points of interest. First of all is the Gerudo Fortress, home to the Gerudo Warriors, an all-female race of well-built, combat-trained women who are quite the challenge to battle against, typically wielding dual blades and being extremely agile. Over the course of history, the Gerudo have been known to typically only have one male born every 100 years. This male is Ganondorf. In some games, the Gerudo are welcoming people, in others, they are quite hostile, which is the case in Ocarina of Time. Link must venture into their home to rescue some carpenters who were captured by the Gerudo, and this is no easy task. The Gerudo Fortress is an extremely heavily guarded place. The warriors are very well trained and very difficult to defeat in battle, but alas, Link manages to free the carpenters. And an interesting piece of lore about the fortress that you might already know if you watched my Lore of Zelda's famous locations on the Wind Waker is that this is the very same as the Forsaken Fortress seen in the Wind Waker. It's a little hard to believe at first looking at them side by side, but it's true. These are one of the same. Beyond here lies the Haunted Wasteland, a harsh and unforgiving desert that must not be taken lightly. It contains a never-ending sandstorm, very poor visibility, and a high chance of becoming lost. Before even being able to attempt to cross the wasteland, Link must pass 2 trials to prove he can realistically attempt such an adventure: the River of Sand and the Phantom Guide. Successfully completing these trials will lead Link across the Haunted Wasteland and lead him to the Desert Colossus, a massive structure found far out in the desert lands that is the home of the Spirit Temple, the game's 8th and final dungeon before the final showdown. The overall region in this game is quite harsh and difficult to traverse. It's still not long after the Hyrulean Civil War, where the Kingdom of Hyrule and Gerudo were heavily against each other, so it's an interesting location to experience, especially after knowing the history with Ganondorf and what went down between him and the King of Hyrule. Before getting into our final famous location of the video, there is one more specific site I'd like to visit. Found in Castletown, both before Ganondorf's takeover and after, stands the famous Temple of Time. A location that has appeared in several Zelda games, a sacred place and one of the most integral parts of this game's story. This is the home of the Master Sword, sealed behind the Door of Time to protect the Holy Blade of Evil's Bane, but also because in the chamber that the sword resides is the entrance to the Sacred Realm. The Door of Time can only be opened with the presence of the 3 spiritual stones. This is why Link seeks them out as a child in order to get the Master Sword, but in an unexpected turn of events, Ganondorf had been following the hero all along, and managed to sneak into the Sacred Realm as Link drew the Master Sword, and ultimately, this led to Link being sealed within the Sacred Realm for 7 years as Ganondorf's reign over Hyrule begun. The temple is a reoccurring location and appears in multiple Zelda games in different forms. Typically, it is a pristine white temple, home to the Master Sword, and in Ocarina of Time it plays a vital role as we are required to come back here on a few occasions to put the blade back into its pedestal and travel back in time, before Ganondorf took over, but it's arguably what happens during the ending of Ocarina of Time that holds the most significance within this temple. After the adventure is over, Princess Zelda is filled with guilt for robbing Link of a childhood. Whilst it was necessary for the hero to take on this quest, he did miss out, so Link leaves the Master Sword back on the pedestal within the Temple of Time. He returns to being a child, and a new history is ready to be created. Now for the final famous location of the video, the fate that Hyrule Castle would fall to, Ganon's castle. When the King of Evil took over Hyrule, this is the stronghold of a home that he built over the original Hyrule Castle, ripping up the land to create a pit of lava that acts as a sort of moat beneath. The castle itself is suspended high above and can only be entered with a magical bridge that is created with the help of all 6 sages. Now, not only did Ganondorf make this his new home, but he also destroyed Castletown just down the road, now overrun with re-dead and an empty shell of what it once was. The castle is made of this black brick and metal. A dark tower makes up the main piece of the stronghold and is one heck of a challenge to traverse inside. Aesthetically, it's the complete opposite of what Hyrule Castle was. It contains bite-sized dungeons, based on the previous dungeons we just traversed in order to progress through the tower. On the way up to Ganondorf, there are rooms filled with enemies that Link must go head to head with. All whilst the unsettling tower theme plays as Link climbs Ganondorf's fortress. And despite being in control of Ganondorf, we can still find symbols that would be more associated with the Hylians. Now, when he reaches the top, he finds Ganondorf in a large room, playing an organ. That music we were hearing was Ganondorf. And he has Zelda suspended above, trapped by his evil. This is where the final face-off begins. Link and Ganondorf go tit for tat here within the castle. At the top of his tower, the battle back and forth until Link manages to knock the King of Evil down. But rather than it being over, whilst Ganondorf is down, the tower begins to rumble. The pair do manage to escape. Feeling certain that Ganondorf has been dealt with, Link approaches the rubble, and in truly shocking fashion, Ganondorf rises from the ashes and turns into the true final boss of this game. Ganon. A large pig beast with 2 large blades and one goal: kill the hero of time. The final battle takes place here and is a showdown for the ages, but the hero with the aid of Princess Zelda triumphs and slays the beast, sealing him away, setting up Hyrule for an age of peace and recovery, putting an end to the era of Ganondorf's reign. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this lore dive for Ocarina of Time's famous locations. What is your favourite bit of lore about some of the locations in this game? I think for me, it's gotta be the Lost Woods. The whole mystery around them is just so fascinating. But let me know yours down in the comments. If you did enjoy, then it would be massively appreciated if you could leave a cheeky wee like down below, as well as consider subscribing for more fabulous Zelda content coming your way. I love making these videos and I aim to provide something entertaining to watch. Whether you're learning new information, enjoy listening in the background, or just love Zelda lore, I hope I achieved that for you. But hey, if there's anything that I can improve on, be sure to let me know. As always, a massive thanks goes to my channel supporters for your incredible backing of the channel and helping to make videos just like this one all the more possible. If you'd like to become a channel supporter today and get yourself some goodies such as your name at the end of my videos, a shout out upon joining, and access to my inside scoop posts, then check out the supporting links down in the description. Also down there you can find my Discord server where you can chat to myself and many other lovely Zelda fans. My other social media pages are also down there if you'd like to keep up to date with me. Thanks again for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or night, and until the next time, I've been Hyrule Gamer.